Good morning, Ilse. I'm happy to be in your home here in Boca Raton, Florida. It would give me great pleasure to interview you. I would like to ask you some questions about your life, your brother Kurt, your father, and your mother. Perhaps you can share some personal experiences that have occurred in Europe many decades ago. What country were you born in, Ilse?
I was born in Riga, which is Latvia, and it's a free country at the present time. It was occupied under the communist rule by Stalin in 1940, and it became free again in 1991. So I enjoy living here in the United States now.
How many years have you been a member of the International Missionary Society?
Well, I was baptized in 1951 in Germany at one of the conferences there, 1951.
Were you a member of the Reformed Church in Latvia?
No, I was only a child, but I was born into parents who were Seventh-day Adventist reformers.
Thank you. How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I had 2 brothers and 1 sister.
Are they members of the Reformed Church?
Well, my one brother was a member of the Reformed Church. The other brother was never baptized, and my sister was also baptized when she was 15 in Riga, Latvia. But she's not in the church at the present time.
Was your father a member of the Reformed Church?
Yes, he was a member since youth. Before they got married, he was already a Seventh-day Adventist.
Tell me something about your father. Describe some good characteristics, qualities of your father.
Well, he was a very gentle man. He was a very faithful man. He never lifted up his voice, never raised his voice. And he was a true Christian.
I heard that your father was faithful and suffered much because he was a Seventh-day Adventist. Was your father persecuted because he would not transgress the 10 Commandments?
Yes, the war broke out and the Russians moved into Riga, Latvia, and we ended up in Germany in a refugee camp. And he always read the Bible and shared the Bible with other refugees and brought them the message. And the authorities, the German authorities, evidently found out about it, and he suffered later persecution. When we came out of the refugee camp, we were assigned living quarters in the city of Leipzig, and it was terrible conditions there. 1 room for the 6 of us. And then we got a card from what was called in German Feuerversicherung, which means like a fire insurance for him and my brother Kurt. And they should come at the specified time to that office. And they went there and they never got out. Till about 6.5, 7 months later. That was not an insurance, it was from the Gestapo, a sort of like they wanted to make sure that they come, and that was a pretense. And he ended up in this jail before other people were sent to concentration camps. They were assembled also in this place. So he suffered a lot, only because he read the Bible.
I was told your father in Latvia received a spiritualistic book that he was asked to dispose of. Tell me where he disposed of this book and what happened.
Yes, they met this young lady, and she was interested in the reform, and she was a medium. She went to these meetings, and later she told my parents that she had this book, or a couple books, I don't quite remember, but she said she doesn't know what to do with this, and she is afraid to dispose of it. So my father said, "Oh, give it to me, I'll dispose of it." And at another time she brought it to him, and we had in Latvia very cold temperatures, and we had these high stoves that come from the floor to the ceiling, and they're covered with tiles, beautiful tiles. And on the bottom is the area where you put the wood in to burn and heat the apartment. And my father put these books in where the fire was burning, and they burned. But all of a sudden there was a horrible noise, and I was a little child, I don't know exactly how old, maybe a year or so, and I was in a crib right next to the stove to be nice and warm. And there was a horrible noise, and the stove collapsed. But luckily, it collapsed inside, the bricks inside came loose and fell out. And a horrible, horrible noise. But I was not hurt because the wall of the big stove was still in order, and the tiles outside were all on. And then my father closed the door, and opened the door rather, and he looked in, and he saw that there was some kind of a brownish fluid, thick like a pasty brownish fluid. And he was sort of stunned, because usually it's ashes that after you burn wood or anything in a stove. You don't have pasty fluid. And he went to the fire department and reported this incident, that the stove sort of collapsed inside. And they came and they investigated, and they said that it was very unusual, highly, highly unusual, and they couldn't understand this brownish paste that was on the bottom where the ashes also were. And I guess that was a satanic power that was angry that my father disposed of these books. So it was very frightening, but I didn't get hurt or anybody else.
Very strange. I have some questions to ask you about your dear mother. Was she educated?
Well, she was not educated because her father died, and she was a super intelligent girl. And the mother had 5 children, and at that time there was no social security and anything, so the mother, my grandmother, had to support herself and the children. So only the boys went to school to finish, to learn a trade. And my mother had to be taken out of school because of lack of money, because she did not have a provider, my grandmother. And the teacher came to their house and begged my grandmother to keep her in the school because she was so smart. And she just couldn't, because she had to help her. She was very artistic, to paint little things that they, at that time, hang on the wall, little wood plaques, and my mother engraved them. And then the grandmother used to sell them for support. And then her father died, and they were very hurt and very lonely, and they had to move into a smaller quarters with the children.
How many languages did she speak?
My mother spoke Latvian, Russian, German, and a little Polish. And she, since she could not go to formal school, educated herself. She read and wrote perfect, with perfect spelling, all languages that she taught herself. And when we went to school as children, we had questions with homework, and she always helped us without having formal education. She was very intelligent.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Describe some good qualities of your mother.
Just like my father, she was a very gentle woman. She never lied, and she told you right out that I cannot tell you this, and I cannot lie, so please, I don't want to answer this. She never lied.
Mm-hmm. How and when did she hear about the truth of the third angel's message?
She was very young. She was only, not even, 16, and she had a very good job offer to be a governess to a very wealthy Polish family that lived in Kiev, at that time Russia. And she went to Kiev to be, there were two young girls that my mother taught them the German language on reading and writing. And she was their governess from morning till night. She was always with these two young girls. And she really enjoyed being with them and teaching them.
Mm-hmm.
And one day they went to a park, and they had an outing in the park. And it was a beautiful day, but all of a sudden it started raining. And they had to look, because the rain came down quite hard, they were running and laughing, and happily they found a gazebo. And they ran into the gazebo for cover. So they were in that place, and all of a sudden some young people came with literature, and it turned out to be the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They were distributing literature, and my mother took some of the literature and started reading it. And she accepted the truth, the Seventh-day Adventist, and she was baptized. And when she came back to Riga after her contract with this family was over, she told her mother, and they were horribly against it. And at that time, if you were underage, you were not allowed to change the religion. That was under the Tsar's time. And it was very dangerous for my mother, and my grandmother was very much against it, and she just did not like that my mother changed. And she was against keeping the Sabbath. But eventually, my grandmother also became a Seventh-day Adventist, and my mother's brother became, and his wife, and a lot of relatives also became Seventh-day Adventists.
Mm-hmm. Was it hard for her to accept the teachings of the state of the dead and the Sabbath truth?
Well, she had a lot of problems. They postponed her baptism because years before, when her father died, they were all in a little room together because they had to move out of their bigger apartment where they were. And my mother could not sleep very well. They were all sad that the father had died. And it was dark, and she looked up, and she saw her father walking behind the door to another room in his night. At that time they wore these long nightgowns in the winter, and he had this nightgown on, and like he usually walked, she said, like a little bit bent over. And she woke up, and she was very frightened, and she told her mother, "Mommy, I saw Papi walking." And the mother told her, "Oh, my dear child, don't worry. The spirit is still on earth for 3 days, and this is not your father, this is his spirit walking." And my mother saw it herself, and this was a big point when she heard about the the Adventist message. She could not accept it that the dead are dead. She believed that the soul still lives.
But later she accepted the
Yes,
truth of the Bible.
Yes, I mentioned before, she was baptized, she accepted it, but it was a stumbling block in the beginning. They had to postpone her baptism because of that.
Yeah. She accepted the Reform message. She became a member of the International Missionary Society in Latvia.
She was in Latvia by that time, and she met my father, who was also in the big church, and they got married, and they were very active in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. As a matter of fact, the other members of my mother's family had all joined also, because my mother was always doing missionary work with the family, and other aunts and uncles, they all accepted the Seventh-day Adventist message, and they were a big choir in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They all belonged to the choir because they all had beautiful voices. And then the war broke out, and a lot of Adventists went to war. They did not refuse to go to war. So a lot of people started talking about this, that this is transgression of the Sabbath commandment. And my mother and father were also baffled by this question that the church is transgressing the law of God. And then after a couple of years, one brother and a sister, I don't know their names, they came to my father's, he owned a lithography, and they came to this lithography, to this printing shop, and they wanted to bring him the message. And my father was very busy working and running his place. He had people working there 24 hours a day. The only time they closed this lithography was Friday night and Sabbath. Otherwise, the machines were continually running. And these people came and tried to bring him the message, but he told them he had no time. He had no time to talk. And so an unfortunate thing happened, and later on, this lithography was taken from him. He lost it. He had to close it up. So God took it away to provide time that he could listen to the Reform message. And they were listening to it, and they decided later on to accept it, because the big church, when they heard that the Reform church, the Reform people are going around and talking to a lot of members of theirs, that they disfellowshipped my mother and my father, for no other reason except that they were listening to the Reform message. And they disfellowshipped them. And my mother and father were very faithful members in tithe and in support, and very hospitable to the poorer members in the church. They invited them for Sabbath afternoons to join them in dinner, and they were very, very active members, and with the choir and everything. And then my brother was already a young man, and he was also, my brother Kurt, and he was also in that same church, but they did not disfellowship him. So he was very, very stunned that they disfellowshipped his parents, but did not disfellowship him. And he must have been about 16 or so, and he went to the brethren in the church, and he was very disappointed, and he said that since his parents were disfellowshipped for inquiring about the Reform, he is asking for to be disfellowshipped also. And he went out. and also was accepted later on by the Reformed Church. He joined the Reformed Church with my mother and father. I was not born yet. This is many years before I was born.
Quite some time. I have some questions about your brother Kurt. What country was he born in?
He was also born in Riga, Latvia, and with also my other brother Harold and my sister Kate. And then in 1933 I was born.
And what was his occupation in Latvia, and then he went to Germany, and then the United States?
Yeah, well, he was a very, very fine cabinet maker, very fine furniture he used to make. And he designed this furniture himself. He was also a designer, in a way, to design the furniture and then be able to construct it. And he also was an artist. He did a lot of portraits and sold them when we were in Germany as refugees. And he supplemented his income with that.
Yes, he had some serious problems with military service and also Sabbath observance in Latvia and Germany. If you could describe that in detail, what actually happened?
Yes, well, this was while we were still in Latvia. There is a law that when you turn 21, it's obligatory to join the army. Everybody has to join. And he went to the authorities, to the military authorities, and he said that he is a Seventh-day Adventist, Reform, and that he does not take a gun and he cannot join the army. And it came before a meeting with about 4 or 6, I don't quite remember, generals and very high people in the army, and they had a conference, and he was there also, and they asked him questions, and he just stated that the Bible teaches, "Thou shalt not kill." So they looked at each other, and they told my brother, in Latvian, they said, "Ļoti šaura audzināts," which means that he was raised very strict and narrow. And they convicted him of 6 months jail because he refused this service. And he was in jail, and the food was not too good. And my mother was permitted to bring once in a while some food to him. And then she knew where he is. She would stand downstairs in Riga, in the street, in the old town. There is this tower and this jail, and she was waving at him through the little window where he was looking out. And I was already about a year old, and she took me with her, and we waved. I don't personally remember, but I remember later what he was telling us, the stories. It was very personal.
So he was released.
He was released. He was released. He had to be in the stable with the horses. No gun, nothing. He just had to feed the horses and brush them and keep them clean. So he was like a farmer there.
The Lord blessed him for his faithfulness.
He certainly was blessed.
Yes. He also had problems in Germany regarding the Sabbath observance under Hitler's regime.
Yes,
Please describe that.
The time that I mentioned that they got this car to come to the fire insurance, and they were kept in this jail, and he saw a lot of atrocities.
With your father?
With my father,
yeah, both of them.
Yes, because they both went, and they were both accused later when God performed actually a miracle that they came out alive. They had to sign a paper that they were producing unrest in the people. In other words, reading the Bible produces unrest. And this was their conviction, and also that they didn't work on Sabbath.
how was he released? There was some incident that took place, that a commander came into his cell and asked him to clean one of the cars. Maybe you can describe that also.
Yes, one of the SS commandants, they were living in a big house with garages and several Mercedes Benzes there. And since my brother was with furnishing and polishing, they must have read his papers. They called him out to come, and they took him by car to this garage and asked him to polish all the cars. And he was polishing and did a beautiful job, and it was already late in the night, and he was still polishing the cars, and these SS people, they had a party going on later that night, and evidently they must have gotten drunk, and they never came to take my brother back to jail. And they left the door open and everything, and they were just partying upstairs with their friends. And then in the morning, this commandant who had taken him originally to this place came down and found my brother still in the garage. So my brother couldn't run away, because if he would have run away, they would have found him anyway. It was not an easy place to hide any place. It was Germany, the SS and other Gestapo all over. So he said, if I run away, they will come and take my family and hurt them. And so he stayed. And as the commandant said, oh, you're here? He said, yes, I did not run away. So I have to ask you to do whatever you can. Please, see what you can do to let me out of this jail. But also I have another request. My father is in a cell above me. And when you accomplish taking me out and getting me out again, then please let my father also come with me out. And about 6.5 months later, they were released from this jail, but they had to sign a paper, and they were, in German it says Dienstverpflichtet. They had to go and work in certain factories that they sent them to. And here again, the Sabbath question came. My father was in a place different than my brother. My brother, since he was a cabinet maker, was sent to a factory that made boxes. And the foreman from that factory, after my brother spoke to him, was very kind, and he said, okay, I understand you do not work on the Saturday. So what you do is you work very hard on Friday, and you make a lot of these boxes, and I will not take them away. I will take away only a few. I will leave them for you, and then you can hide behind them on Sabbath and not work. So he had, again, a lot of blessing, and that he found this very, very kind man who let him hide behind the boxes on Sabbath, that he didn't have to work. And that factory was in another town from us, in Dresden.
Mm-hmm.
So they suffered a lot for the truth.
And there were also miracles that God performed.
Yes, definitely, because to come out from there was a miracle in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Because nobody came out from there.
Yeah.
They were shipped to concentration camps.
Many lost their lives.
Yes.
It was a difficult time during the war, wasn't it, Ilse?
Oh, definitely.
Do you have anything more to say about your father, about Kurt, and anything else, something significant that you can think about before we close?
We were, at that time the war ended and the Americans moved in, and There were a lot of refugees and camps in Germany, and we were very fortunate because a lot of the refugees were in schools and gymnasiums, 100 people, 120 people, and they suffered a lot because there was just a lot of persecution that happened before, and these people were like herded together like a bunch of animals. But we were fortunate. We were in this little town, and the Americans, because they had no more room for all these refugees, they took some of the hotels and used that as refugee camps. So our family had a hotel room, and my father, my mother, my sister, my brother Kurt, his wife, and Henry was born in that camp, my nephew, and me, and we were all in one room, but we had a room by ourselves and even a sink. So we were very fortunate that we didn't have to be in these huge school auditoriums to live. Mm-hmm. till we moved out and moved on our own.
Thank you, Ilse. I don't have any more questions to ask you. Thank you for this interview. It's much appreciated, and may God richly bless you with health and happiness in the new year.